White flakes drifted down like memories of forgotten fires, settling gently on the worn stones of the marketplace. Winter held the town in its quiet grip, but through that stillness came a sound that cut deep, raw, human, filled with desperation. A pregnant woman, her belly heavy with new life soon to arrive, pressed a stolen loaf against her chest like it was the final warmth left in existence. Her breathing was labored, her skin ghostly against the bitter air, yet the lash struck with sounds louder than her suffering. Townsfolk assembled, their feet scraping against ice, voices sharp with condemnation. "Thief!" someone whispered with venom. "Disgraceful!" another spoke with revulsion, as if her desperation disgusted them more than her transgression. The expectant mother staggered from the blow across her spine, nearly losing her grip on the bread. She doubled over, shaking, wrapping her arm protectively around her unborn child. Beside her, a little girl barely past 5 years old screamed at the hostile circle. "Stop it! The baby's almost here!" Her tiny voice shattered the air like thin ice cracking on water. She had no jacket, no boots, just a worn dress that offered no protection from the freeze, her bare toes leaving crimson trails in the white powder. Her small fists pounded against the man holding the whip, but he pushed her away with his forearm. She tumbled to the ground, gasping, then scrambled back to her mother with eyes wild with fear. The bread fell from the woman's grasp, landed in the snow, lying there like a mound of crust and flour worth more than her honor. Even so, she reached down to retrieve it, as if letting it go meant surrendering everything. The mob pressed in closer, the frigid air thick with their breath and hatred. Nobody moved to assist. Nobody bent to help the fallen child. Then, from the street's distant end came the steady rhythm of heavy footsteps. Deliberate, measured, each step echoed through the quiet like iron striking stone. A towering figure materialized through the swirling snow curtain. A man with wide shoulders, his hat drawn low against the gusts. His coat hung thick, covered in frost, yet the calm power in his walk made the spectators retreat without understanding why. The little girl noticed him first. Her small face turned upward, streaked with tears, as though she'd glimpsed something she'd never dared dream of. She grasped his coat as he approached, holding tight with both hands. "They're harming her," she sobbed, her voice fracturing. "The baby's coming. Help us." The man gazed down, his eyes hidden beneath his hat's brim. Without words, he placed one gloved hand softly on the child's shoulder, calming her trembling. His attention then turned to the mother crouched in the snow, breathing heavily, blood staining her garment where the whip had split fabric and flesh. She met his gaze briefly before dropping her face in mortification. The man with the whip scoffed. "She took bread, that ain't charity." His arm twitched, prepared to strike once more, but the tall stranger moved forward. He didn't shout or draw a weapon. Instead, he reached inside his coat and pulled out a creased stack of currency, weathered from honest work's earnings. He pressed it firmly into the merchant's palm. "Payment for the bread," he said, his voice quiet, made rough by silence rather than speech. The merchant hesitated, eyes darting between the money and the stranger's imposing frame, then with a grumble, lowered his weapon. The crowd stirred uneasily, but none challenged the transaction once payment had been made. The rancher crouched down, picked up the loaf from the snow, and cleaned it with his glove. He extended it toward the woman. Her hand trembled as she accepted it. Humiliation burned in her gaze, yet hunger and necessity prevailed. She grasped the bread tightly, and tears streamed down her face, mixing with melting snow. The child pressed against her mother's side, clutching at her torn skirts, staring at the man as if unable to turn away. The rancher remained, his presence forming a barrier between them and the circle of judgment. The marketplace had grown still. Snow continued its whispered descent, catching in his dark hair, outlining his motionless form. He stayed until the final onlooker wandered off, muttering complaints, dispersing like scavengers denied their feast. When only silence lingered, he knelt slightly, meeting the child's eyes. She continued shivering, still gripping her mother's hand, but her gaze bright, wide, wounded by terror, remained fixed on him. "You rescued us," she breathed, her small voice carrying more certainty than question. The man offered no reply. Instead, he raised his hand and placed it briefly, almost hesitantly, on her shoulder, as though the touch itself might convey more meaning than language could. He stood, his shadow stretching long across the snow, and offered his arm to the woman. She stared at it, caught between dignity and exhaustion. Her mouth opened, but no words emerged. The whip marks on her back burned. Her belly contracted with labor's first warnings, and the bread pressed to her chest felt heavier than stone. She wished to rise but couldn't manage it. The rancher waited. His hand stayed extended, steady, patient, as though time itself would yield to her choice. The snowfall intensified, settling on his shoulders, on the child's hair, on the woman's damaged dress. Her body swayed, her face pale with agony, and then her knees gave way. The child cried out, reaching for her mother. The bread slipped once more, half buried in white powder, and as the woman collapsed, her hand finally found his. The rancher caught her before she hit the ground, and the street, once filled with condemnation, fell silent beneath the weight of what was beginning. The wagon groaned as metal-rimmed wheels carved through the snow, each revolution straining under the burden of unspoken thoughts. The rancher gripped the reins with a stillness that seemed born from long winters and heavier loads. Next to him sat the woman, her frame bent against the pain in her spine, arms wrapped securely around both her swollen belly and the precious loaf, as if she could protect both child and nourishment in the same fragile embrace. The small girl huddled between them, pressed so close to her mother she appeared more like a shadow than flesh. The town still lingered behind them, though distance grew with every horse's step. Cruel whispers followed like smoke, faint and bitter, clinging to the air even after the voices faded. "He'll rue this decision," one had muttered. "No decent man welcomes such trouble." The word stuck in the woman's mind, each one a weight she couldn't shed. She stared downward, ashamed, knowing judgment would pursue her far longer than any whip's sting. Snowflakes settled in her hair, melting into droplets that rolled down her bruised skin. She didn't dare look at the man who had lifted her, who now sat close enough that his presence filled the wagon with quiet intensity. His silence disturbed her more than scorn would have words she could counter, defend against, even endure. But his lack of them, steady, observant, unhurried, left her vulnerable in ways she couldn't define. The girl reached across her mother's lap and touched the rancher's sleeve. Her small hand, reddened by cold, tugged once before pulling back. He glanced down but remained quiet. Instead, he removed his heavy coat and wrapped it around the child. The fabric engulfed her, yet she smiled the faintest spark of joy in her weary expression. The woman looked away, pressing her cheek against the wagon's wooden rail. She despised how relief weakened her resolve, how warmth from a stranger's compassion seeped through her defenses. Despite her pride, she longed to express gratitude, but her throat was raw, trapped between thankfulness and fear of obligation. Men who offered aid often demanded something in return. The bread, wrapped in torn cloth, rested across her lap. She broke it in half, fingers shaking, and gave the larger portion to her daughter. The child ate eagerly, crumbs collecting on her lips. But before swallowing, she tore off a small piece and offered it toward the rancher. He paused, rein still in one hand, then leaned down slightly, accepting the gift as though it were a banquet. He didn't eat immediately. Instead, he placed it carefully on the bench beside him, a gesture of respect that left the girl watching him with wide, quiet wonder. The path stretched onward, winding through snow-laden pines. The world contracted to the rhythm of hooves, the creak of wood, the soft rustle of fabric as the woman shifted to relieve the pressure in her belly. She could sense the time approaching, each tightening a warning. Though she prayed for strength to endure longer, the shame of delivering her child beneath another's roof gnawed at her. The rancher finally spoke, his voice low, rough as if rarely used. "Cabin's close, nothing more," just that simple statement. Yet the words landed like stones in calm water, sending ripples through her chest. He wasn't casting them out. Not yet. She closed her eyes, trying to summon anger to protect her heart. But exhaustion pressed harder. Her body had grown weary of resistance. The whip, the hunger, the cold all had carved her thin. She yearned to believe his silence wasn't judgment but patience, though such hope felt perilous. The girl leaned against the rancher's arm, her eyelids drooping, crumbs still clutched in her palm. He adjusted slightly, careful not to disturb her, his frame a wall of warmth beside her. The woman watched, startled by the ease with which her daughter had claimed him. Trust came quickly to children, sometimes too quickly, but she observed how his hand, rough with calluses, stilled when the child's head tipped against him. He allowed her to stay. For a moment, the woman permitted herself to imagine a different tale, one where kindness demanded nothing, where her child could rest safely without cost. The thought was fleeting, as delicate as frost on glass, but it lingered. She turned her face toward the falling snow, hiding the tear that escaped. The wagon jolted over a bump, and she winced, clutching her belly. Pain flared sharp, then dulled, leaving her trembling. She didn't speak of it. To voice it aloud would make it real, and she wasn't ready. Not here, not yet. She pressed the loaf tighter, as if bread alone could anchor her against the storm within. The rancher's gaze flicked once toward her, measuring, calculating, but he asked nothing. He only tightened his grip on the reins, urging the horses forward with quiet determination. The cabin waited ahead, hidden among snow and pine, its hearth cold and waiting. Behind them, the town vanished into white, its judgment swallowed by distance. Yet the woman knew whispers traveled faster than wagons. Gossip would find them. It always did. She braced herself, heart taut as wire, wondering if she had escaped one cruelty only to stumble into another. The girl stirred in sleep, her small hand sliding down to rest against the rancher's weathered palm. He froze, then, slowly, gently, curled his fingers around hers. The woman witnessed it, her breath catching. Something unspoken settled in the space between them, fragile as firelight, dangerous as hope. And as the wagon rounded the curve, she felt the first true pang of labor ripple through her, sharp enough to steal her breath. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. Thank you.